Coming up on this week's show, a game changer for N64 fans.
Ron Gilbert is back with another new game.
And the psychology of Myst and The Sims with our guest, Nicole Lazzaro.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every week with our lovely friends at Bitmap Books. Now, have you seen PC Engine, the box art collection, the brand new collector's edition? Now, this is limited to just 2,000 copies and will never, ever be printed again. So if you want to find out all about that and check out the rest of their retro gaming collection, it's available right now through their website at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 429, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And very nice to be joining us for the podcast. It comes out every single Friday. That's the thing about this show. We do often have people saying to us, the weekend begins when the Retro Hour drops.
The party begins when the Retro Hour drops.
We're basically like a Crunchy bar. Remember Thank Crunchy, It's Friday? That's a reference that only people who were around in the 90s in Britain probably remember. TV advert for a chocolate bar.
Not good for the international audience.
There you go. Fridays are all about retro gaming in our world. So great to be joining us for another week. And not retro gaming related, but I've got to ask, since it's been absolutely everywhere this week, anyone see the Northern Lights over the weekend?
Nope. We were
slept through. I slept through the Northern Lights, sadly.
I'm glad it wasn't just me. Literally, it's been like a bucket list item for me to see the Northern Lights. I had no idea that was going to be happening on Friday night, but I've been enjoying the pictures that everyone's been sharing, not only all over social media, but plenty in our Discord as well, I saw over the weekend. So thank you very much for that. But of course, getting back on topic, this podcast is all about the history of the video games industry, letting you know what's going on in the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology right now. Of course, there's always new happenings every single week, and new people doing incredible things with classic systems and bringing out new software. We'll talk all about that in a moment. And of course, where the podcast really comes into its own when we welcome on a veteran of the industry to basically tell us their story about the work that they've done. And this week, my word, are we going to cram a lot into our interview with Nicole Lazzaro.
Oh, yes. It was amazing getting Nicole on. I've wanted to have her on the podcast since we very started, She's absolutely amazing. So she's worked in the area of player design experience and also like emotions within video games and how we react to them. And you'd think, that's a kind of a very modern thing that games companies are looking at. And she's been doing it since 1992. She was involved with early stuff like the CDI as well, and the kind of early CD-ROM world. And then, of course, went into, consulting for titles like Myst as well, and working with their player experience, but also, of course, The Sims, which is a really interesting title as well, because, you have a lot of emotions with The Sims, a lot of balancing of how they act and how they behave, but also a lot of emotions playing them. Joe, were you ever really cruel to The Sims when you were a kid?
I bet he was.
I wasn't really cruel. I just played it a lot. I had it on the GameCube.
Oh, wow.
Because of I randomly broke my GameCube. It fell off the wardrobe when I was like 15, and my dad gave me the money to go buy a new one, and it came with The Sims 2, and I was like, oh, Sims 2, and I ended up playing it to death, funny enough. But yeah, I don't remember being cruel, to be honest. I think I just played it as intended. Which is a bit boring.
A bit of a crazy kid when I played mine. Yeah, I'd make like fire mazes out of tables and stuff, and see them try to escape, or embarrass them in public and stuff.
There's got to be some psychological studies that have been done on watching people playing The Sims and how they react.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, Ravi, in terms of what you did to The Sims, but
God knows.
Probably not a good thing. But yeah, incredible games, and obviously a series that continues to this day. I did mention in the interview, there's been over 100 different Sims releases. And obviously that kind of spanned out of, we're talking about SimCity a bit as well, touch on that, and working with the legend that is Will Wright. And also, you mentioned then, that she worked on Myst. It was actually a sequel that Nicole worked on, Riven. And just what a huge title that was, because Myst, the original Myst was, as we mentioned in the interview, when that came out, the biggest selling video game of all time.
Yeah, and it's weird because we mentioned in the interview, it's one of those worlds that sticks in your head.
Yeah.
And we kind of wondered why. And there's a lot of psychology behind it as well. And, she studied psychology at Stanford, but also she was doing one of the really early research papers on player emotions and how people play and connect to games. So it's great to see that's, a theme throughout all of the work that she's done. And she's still pushing that today as well. So it's an absolutely fascinating interview this week.
Yeah, and finding out a bit about kind of what makes us get immersed in a certain game and, what is it that makes you want to keep coming back and experiencing it over and over again. So, like you said, really interesting chat with our special guest, Nicole Lazzaro, coming up on the podcast in around half an hour from now. So that does mean half an hour to let you know what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last week, because that's what we do during the week. We have a nice little document. We have a Facebook group, we're always looking at keeping our eyes out and pinging messages back and forth, and we save you the job of having to catch up on all the blogs and everything as well. We do it for you. So, and also we appreciate any submissions that we get in our Discord group as well, which is where a couple of the news stories have come from this week as well. So we're going to join our wonderful Discord community. The details to join us on there are on the website at theretrohour.com. So let's talk about this first of all. Now, I've got to admit my jaw dropped when I watched this video because I did say in the intro to the podcast there, this is a game changer for N64 fans, and a bit of a play on words because in more ways than one, this literally does change N64 games.
This is crazy. So we've kind of covered this a few months ago with the Mario 64 decompiled port.
Yes,
PC.
we did.
So this is a new tool, PC tool called N64 Recomp, which dramatically changes the way we experience N64 titles in a modern era. So to put it, for me, now correct me if I'm wrong, this is a tool which decompiles the game and then instantly remakes the game in a matter of seconds, but then ports it to PC for you, and all you need to have is a N64 ROM. That's all you need with this tool.
So I think this is, with PC, when you're configuring a lot of games, there's configuration files that you usually need to do. And if anybody's used Steam and used old games, sometimes you have to put in launch options and commands to run it in higher resolutions because the original games aren't supported. This is a kind of way of scripting it and modifying it, but also so I've modified GTA before. And there's a thing called Script Hook, which is also like that. So if you put any mods in, they're loaded up as script. It fires in all the mods, the configuration files, all of this, and then kind of outputs it. You have to recompile GTA to add these mods into it. So this is kind of a way of doing it, but it supports something called RT64, which is a ray tracing plugin that's also come out for the PC, and that's using modern APIs, but also means you can do stuff like add this ultra widescreen support. You can, increase it into a kind of an N64 that has the hardware, uses the latest hardware capabilities on the PC, and also uses all those original things. HD texture packs, all sorts of stuff you could add on top of it. So this seems like people have been doing this individually, but this is a tool just to do it, wham, bam, straight away, recompile it, bang it out. And I think that's awesome because it means anybody can do it, really. And it's not just people waiting on releases. I can imagine that they'll be able to do this for lots of different titles that come out and soup them up in the PC, basically. We've seen this before with like PS2 emulators where you have extra modes that you can add in, but I think this is very different because it's recompiling it.
Yeah, now there are a couple of takeaways about this story for me. The first one is whenever I've tried N64 emulation on a PC, there's always been some kind of issue like graphical glitches or frame rates being wrong or something's kind of not worked properly. So I think in terms of having recompiled versions that are like native to x86 PCs, because I think this runs on Windows and Linux.
But also on the Steam Deck, which is really cool as well. So you can output this to your Steam Deck.
That is a PC anyway, isn't it? Yeah, the Steam Deck, I think.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously it's going to work well on there. But also the fact that it does, like you said, gives that graphical fidelity to N64 titles, which again, famously, if we always talk about it whenever we mention N64, the Vaseline effect, the draw distance, stuff like that. But basically it means that now all you do is you have your N64 ROM, you open this PC tool, N64 Recomp on your PC, you drag and drop the ROM in, and then what it does is it decompiles it, and then recompiles a build that works natively on the PC. Like you said, it can have ray tracing on there, the frame rates are not capped, it can, fill 1080p ultra-wide monitors even as well. So really, it is bringing N64 games seamlessly to the PC at the click of a button.
Yeah, and I guess the limit is the hardware that you have on your PC. You need, like, if you want to go high with all the effects, you'll probably need quite a hefty machine. But still, it will run with low latency. It will do all that if everything's, set up correctly.
I mean, some people have been nervous that, obviously anything to do with Nintendo, but they're saying, obviously, there's no Nintendo assets in here. You've got to supply your own ROM. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's just a kind of menu system, really. Yeah, that then says do this. And it's got no source code in there.
Yeah, and I think it's incredible as well because, I mean, I'll link this video in the show notes as well, and there are side-by-side comparisons, he's showing stuff like Majora's Mask in there as well, and you can really see the difference, can't you, when he's playing these upscaled, basically recompiled PC versions of the games. I mean, someone like you, Joe, who grew up on these games, what was your impression watching the video?
So when I first started watching the video, I was like, yeah, it looks pretty good. You got the ultra widescreen and all that. But it was actually when I kind of noticed it was the draw distance that I noticed that looked fantastic. And then also the textures on like the water on the Majora's Mask version. So which is called Zelda 64 Recomp. He's called it. It's by a guy called Wise Guy who's made this. And he's been working on it for the last 2 years, 2 years plus. And Zelda 64 Recomp is kind of like the one he said, look at this, in the video, what I've done, but it works on all these different games as well. It took me a good, 30 seconds of studying it and just being like, okay, that water looks amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, that grass looks, fantastic. Oh, okay, the mirror shield on Link's back looks absolutely amazing. And then kind of remembering in my mind's eye, not trying to think of the 3DS version, but think of the N64 version where it was massive polygons and, really angular and square and stuff and it took me that minute to go, actually, this is a game changer. This looks absolutely beautiful.
I think some of the stretched out textures don't look as good, but, as with Minecraft or whatever, people are going to do ultra realistic ones. I bet you're going to have an ultra realistic HD pack version of, Zelda, and it's just going to look bonkers.
I'm imagining GoldenEye looking like that. I'll give you nightmares.
Yeah, exactly. But I can imagine there's so much potential with this for people to put stuff on. You could have a Simpsons style one. You could have all sorts. As soon as people start putting that content out there and getting it into this recompiler, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, basically it gives you, upscaled HD versions of N64 games at the click of a button.
Yeah,
which I think is absolutely awesome. So, very good work. So you want to check that out. That is available now. It's called N64 Recomp. I'll link it up. And, of course, the video so you can check out what it looks like in this week's show notes. Now, seeing a headline like Ron Gilbert is making a new game is always something that will catch my attention. And obviously, Ron, famous for the Monkey Island games back in the day, probably was best known for. And, of course, he returned to the Monkey Island series with Return to Monkey Island. Back in 2022. And before that did the fantastic Thimbleweed Park, which was basically a bit of a return to that kind of late 80s, early 90s.
I love that.
LucasArts style, wasn't it? You and I both loved that game, didn't we, when it came out, Ravi?
Apart from finding the pixels, the individual bits of dust. That was very frustrating. Yeah.
Yes. So, incredible designer, and it's always great to see, someone like Ron continuing in the industry, particularly when he's making something that is a little bit different from what you might expect. Now, obviously, everyone knows Ron Gilbert for adventure games, but it looks like at the moment he's working on an untitled as yet RPG game that looks quite similar to classic Zelda.
The articles are all saying it looks like classic Zelda. It looks like A Link to the Past. It does. Don't get me wrong, graphically, and the pixel art of it is absolutely stunning. And you guys are going to be so disappointed with me now because I can't remember his name. But the character sprite in there does look like the main guy from Monkey Island.
Guybrush Threepwood.
There we go. But I've got a feeling it's going to be more in the vein of like Stardew Valley.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, more like maybe it's going to be an RPG, but there's going to be like farming sim or building sim kind of like elements to it maybe. But then with it being Ron Gilbert, it might be more of because he says it's an RPG, but then I'm wondering if there is going to be more kind of like, choose your own kind of path, kind of like situations in it as well, kind of not.
Well, they're describing it as classic Zelda meets Diablo meets Thimbleweed Park. And Thimbleweed Park is obviously an adventure game.
It meets Diablo, though.
Yeah.
Like, could it get really dark?
Yeah, maybe it could.
Just put out this lovely little cute screenshot, and then like the main game is like totally different.
Well, apparently there's going to be dungeons in there. There's going to be spooky forests as well. A cemetery full of skeletons. So it looks like it could get a bit dark.
I was just about to say skeletons.
Yeah. So it could get a bit creepy. That's the thing. I mean, they reckon at the moment it's still in development. He's hired a few other people on, including Alyssa Black, who's joined him as a quest designer as well. And Ron actually announced on his blog that having her involved ups the chance by 37% that he'll actually get the game finished before he gets bored and disillusioned of it. So fingers crossed it will be out. They reckon a release date should be late this year or maybe early 2025 if it slips a bit as well. But I think it's interesting to see Ron Gilbert making basically an RPG game because, it is definitely something that we wouldn't expect from him. So I've got a feeling, knowing Ron's kind of the humour he likes to put in his games as well, I imagine we'll see quite a few twists in this game.
Yeah, well, he likes to do a twist on a classic format. Monkey Islands was the twist on, point and click. So, maybe he's going to approach this in a different way and come up with some innovative and fun stuff that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get on your wish list. So if you want to check that out, I will link up the progress so far. Just a few screenshots at the moment, but looks really interesting. I'll put that in the show notes too. Now, speaking of games that look very interesting, and I must admit, I did say then having Ron Gilbert involved in an RPG might actually make me want to play it, because RPGs are not really the genre that I normally go for. You guys know I'm a bit more of an adventure game kind of fan, and my arcade games, I love my platformers and my racing games. However, I've been checking out the trailer to this, and this might turn me onto RPGs a bit as well, because I love the atmosphere on this release trailer for a game that just dropped this week, actually, yesterday at the time of recording, called Dread Delusion.
This looks great. It looks like a old kind of Elder Scrolls, but it doesn't. It looks like it's weird. It's an RPG, but it looks like you've bought the cheapest graphics card and you've gone up to the lowest settings on your PC in like 1999, and you're playing a more kind of advanced game, but the palette mode's also been a bit messed up. And
it looks a bit like an N64 game, actually, to me, in some parts.
Yeah, it kind of does. Or it looks like, when you get like VGA wrong or something, or there's like a little switch that goes wrong with it. Or it used to be a thing when I'd load Amiga demos and then I'd try and put like hand mode up, or I'd try and put up another title and the palettes had all switched around and it looked a bit odd. Now, This is quite like Morrowind, if you've played that before, one of the older Elder Scrolls games, and it's an RPG. Just looking at it, it's called Dread Delusion, and I think it looks absolutely amazing. Joe, like, this isn't your specialist area, kind of PC RPGs, but what do you think of it?
I mean, I played the hell out of Morrowind and Oblivion, but cool.
Okay. I was just assuming you weren't a PC pro.
Full of surprises.
With your GameCube.
It does look like it's... The only way I can describe it, and I am ripping this straight from the article, it does look like Morrowind, but if it was made in an alternative dimension. Like, it's a dark steampunk kind of version of Morrowind, because it's very much, fantasy, but then it's quite steampunk as well. Like, there's like weird spider enemies coming at you, but they're made out of train parts. A little bit like Wild Wild West, the film, the Will Smith film, and houses which are built on big massive tank tracks that move around. But then you have your sword and your shield and your magic, and the world is like full of lightning and the sky is blood red, and it does look wicked. But it looks quite scary and surreal as well.
Quite PS1-y, wobbly and stretch graphics, but then like too much stuff on there to be PS1. Like, you know, you usually have a bit more fog.
What the PS1 looks like in your mind's memory.
To me, it looks like Morrowind on like a terrible, you know, PC for the time. Like that's what it looks like to me.
I like the skies, you know, the purple skies and stuff. Remind me a bit of the skies in like Quake or something.
Yeah, or the sewer of slime in Ghostbusters 2.
Yes.
That's what it reminds me of. But yeah, really, really, really surreal looking game. But does look pretty cool. Came out this week, didn't it?
Yeah, it's like £15.50. And,
nice.
You know, it's on Steam. It seems to be getting some really good reviews as well. And I just saw this and I thought, wow, this is something that's stunning, but also something that's really hard to describe in a podcast because we're talking about the graphics. And, yeah, that's the main thing that stood out for me.
Yeah, I mean, graphically, to me, it does really appeal. That's probably the main thing that makes me want to play this game. And there is a demo that you can download for free if you want to try it out, about a 15-minute demo. So if you want to get a feel for the game, but like you said, Ravi, for sake of 15 quid, if this is your genre, definitely a no-brainer if you want something new and very retro-looking to play this weekend. That's called Dread Delusion. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Now, I don't know if any of us have actually watched the... did you start watching the Fallout TV series, Joe?
I did. I watched the whole thing last week.
Oh, right, okay. Nice. You binged it.
Did you binge it in 1 week?
In like 3... No, it was about 4 nights. We watched an episode a night.
Oh, nice.
And then we got to like the last 3-4 episodes and my wife was like, we've got to watch them all because she was on the edge of her seat. So we ended up like staying up and watching the last 4 in a row. But yeah,
so we lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it because I really enjoyed the Fallout games. And my wife really enjoyed it, who'd never even given Fallout a second thought. So yeah, I think the hype is true.
Well, it definitely does seem like it's, you know, the year or the couple of years of video games, television adaptations. Obviously, we had The Last of Us as well. That, again, it's like, you know, I need to watch these. I keep thinking, you know, Fallout, I think that was my problem then. I thought my missus is not a gamer at all. Would she enjoy it? But I think... Obviously, these are kind of created for a general audience, aren't they, who just like good dramas. So, yeah, I'll definitely give that a try because I've seen so much hype about it. But it looks like there's going to be another live-action video game adaptation coming to Amazon, this one, again. And this is one of the biggest video games of all time. Lara Croft is coming to the small screen.
I thought she'd already come to the small screen, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought that as well.
But she hasn't. There was the reboot like film that came out about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe
2018. Yeah, 2018, I saw that one. Yeah, I thought it was all right, but it didn't stand out to me. I still prefer the old one.
Angelina Jolie.
Well, I was going to say Chris Barry. He was not kind of a real rimmer. Yeah, Angelina as well.
Each to their own, Ravi.
We're such nerds. But yeah, Amazon, who were behind the Fallout series, Amazon MGM, have picked this up and they've greenlit it, and they're going to be working with Crystal Dynamics on the complete adaptation of the Tomb Raider, franchise to TV show. And yeah, I mean, they've made Fallout work, and Fallout is quite niche, I guess. And I think Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, is a much more known IP. I don't want to say bigger IP, but I think it's definitely a more known IP. Like, if I asked my dad who's Tomb Raider, he'd say Lara Croft. But if I said, what's Fallout, he'd be like, what the hell are you on about? Kind of thing, or especially before before the Fallout TV show. So I think it will be big. Just, I don't know. I don't think it will grip me as much as Fallout. I'm not as a big Tomb Raider fan as you guys. And Fallout's quite unique, I know the apocalypse stuff has been done to death in recent years, but it's quite a unique story and stuff. Whereas, I don't know, Tomb Raider, I'm about to say
it's interesting. So they've announced Phoebe Waller-Bridge as the writer, and she was in Fleabag, which is that really good comedy show, but also she wrote Killing Eve as well, which is a really, really, really good series if you've seen that.
I have, yeah.
She's been part of like Broadchurch as well when she was in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So I think she's going to have a lot of history around her, and she's a decent writer and wins a lot of awards. So I think they've got some a bit of meat in there for the writing team and producer.
That Indiana Jones connection interests me as well. Because obviously, I mean, you know, Lara Croft, we've also heard her described as like the female Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So if it kind of feels a bit like an Indiana Jones kind of, you know, movie stretched out over a bunch of TV episodes, that could definitely work. Yeah, and I mean, like you said, Joe, I think, you know, she's obviously a lot more recognisable to a general audience. So I think it will be a success. My brother, it blew his mind that there is actually a Lara Croft Way in Derby, just down the road from us. Where actually named after
Brian Clough Way, but
yeah, he said, "No, there's not. You're lying." I was like, "No, there really is." So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This will be one that I will definitely watch. At the moment, it looks like it's just been greenlit, so in the early stages, but we'll keep an eye on that. Lara Croft coming to the small screen. Now, why don't we go even smaller screen? The Game Boy Advance. Now, this is quite impressive. This is a modder who's rewriting Super Mario 64 to run on the GBA.
I feel like this was like the week of N64 for news, because there was a lot of other things in the news as well about N64 this week. But yeah, this is a weird one because it's like it's being described as a demake of Mario 64. But then Mario 64 came out in 1996 and the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001. But obviously the Game Boy Advance isn't as advanced as an N64.
No, it's more like a SNES, really, isn't it, in terms of the hardware power?
I always saw the Game Boy Advance as like it was a handheld Super Nintendo. You know, when I was a kid, I got a Game Boy Advance, you know, when I was like 11, 12 years old. And I always saw it as the games that were ported to it were all Super Nintendo games that Nintendo were porting. And then graphically, you know, it always looked like a Super Nintendo. And whenever they did a 3D game, you know, on there, or port of it or whatever, like Doom, or I'm trying to think of all 3D games.
Driver 3
Driver
they had on there. A Payback as well was another one.
Yeah, they all had that kind of like Mode 7 look or quite pixelated Super Nintendo 3D look to them. So this remake that is being ported to the Game Boy Advance does look quite interesting. Now, because there's a lack of GPU with the Game Boy Advance, it is actually it's not being ported. The code is being completely rewritten from the ground up for this remake, which is being done by a guy called Joshua Barreto. And it's taking him a long, long time. But so far, I mean, it's slow, it's pixelated, but it's definitely Mario 64.
Yeah, I'd say it's tough to do 3D on the GBA from the stuff that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can tell, like you said, it is that first level when, you know, Mario's running around outside in the grounds of the castle, and you can jump under the bridge and into the water even in this demo. Hasn't got Mario in it at the moment. It's like a weird red triangle.
Maybe that's for copyright purposes.
It is.
It could be. Yeah.
Apparently it is. So I was reading into it. So it's meant to be an elf, that red triangle.
Yeah, you can tell.
Yeah, you can really tell.
It's like a piece from Trivial Pursuit.
Yeah. But yeah, he's not put Mario in for obvious reasons at the moment. I don't think we're going to end up with an entire Mario 64 cartridge for the Game Boy Advance, because I just don't think it's going to be able to hold it all. But as a proof of concept, it's very cool. And frame rate wise, it's not too bad.
It's definitely playable.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, I mean, considering the hardware it's running on. And I think even though, you know, we're kind of taking the mick out of the fact that the character is literally a red triangle, it does have a shadow, just like Mario does as well.
He does have a little shadow.
So, it sold it to me. But yeah, it looks awesome. So if you want to get a little look at that, like you said, I think it's more a little proof of concept, isn't it, to kind of show that it can be done. And obviously, Mario's not in it. He's written this code from scratch. He said he's hoping to release the code basically into the public domain in the future, so people can do with it what they want. So maybe we will at some point get people developing that into a full game. Now the engine's up and running, so if you want to get a little look at that, I'll link that up. And of course, everything else we talk about, you don't have to Google around. I save you the job every week. Check these show notes on your podcast app or head to the website at theretrohour.com. Right then, patrons, hold tight. We have got a couple of extra news stories coming up for you, including something that's happened on the N64. Like I said, the week of N64 for the first time in 28 years. Our patrons will hear about that in a moment, because that's what we do on the podcast. We chop the adverts out for our patrons, and then because we don't want to give you a shorter show, we give you like an extra 10, 15 minutes of news on the podcast each week as well. Advert free, and there are other reasons to support the Retro Hour as well on Patreon, including our wonderful Hangouts, which another one coming up in a couple of weeks. They're all so much fun, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely love the Hangouts. Like, it's also the time that we get to see all the patrons as well because we're on video as well. So it's good. You know, we're usually chatting in the Discord as well. We have our own backers chat channel as well. But I just love getting together with the patrons. And the problem about it is I always learn about something new, and then I'm on eBay and I'm just sitting there. So I always try and go to the patrons chat with like an empty wallet, or kind of hold back because I will end up buying loads and loads of stuff.
Yeah, it's always such a giggle. We just geek out for a couple of hours on normally the last Sunday of the month. So that'll be coming up next weekend, Sunday 26th of May from 8 p.m. UK time. Basically a massive Zoom call. We all get together, nerd out for a couple of hours, have a couple of drinks, always a laugh. We're always very welcoming to new members as well. So if you'd like to come along and join us for this month's Hangout, all the details to join our wonderful patrons community are on the website at theretrohour.com. Okay, then we're going to be talking to this week's special guest inside the world of Myst, The Sims, and lots more with Nicole Lazzaro coming up in just a moment. Before we do that, let's take a quick second to give a massive thank you to a regular sponsor of the Retro Hour podcast, and we all know the noise by now. The beautiful sound of making money. That's thanks to this week's sponsor, our friends at Shopify. Now, Ravi, you've got your big Amiga show coming up next month, and you said you're going to be getting the Shopify handsets ready, the little point-of-sale systems ready for it?
Yeah. And, it's great because I want them to be like fast, easy to use, efficient, and it's really good to have somewhere like Shopify as well. But then also I can, share stuff that I'll be selling from the store if I've got any stock left or anything like that on Facebook and Instagram and all over TikTok, and then sell it online.
You can. Well, that's the thing about Shopify. It is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Because, everyone at the moment is doing it. Everyone's got a side hustle or even becoming their own boss. And Shopify has got everything you need. It is revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whatever you sell, whether in person or online, they cover all your sales channels. Now, we mentioned those shop-ready point-of-sale systems. You might see these little card readers. You all see them now, when you go to even like our village fates that we have on. People have got that because no one carries cash anymore. And they also do an all-in-one commerce platform as well to sell online, even across your social media channels. So, marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth and give you complete control over your business. The best thing about it is you don't have to learn any new skills. No design, no coding, nothing like that. And they've got an extensive course library and support available as well to support your success every step of the way. So if you sell anything, Shopify will be there to empower you and give you the confidence you need to take your business to the next level. So if you want to get serious about selling, why don't you give Shopify a try today? And we've got you, of course, an incredible offer, like we always do for our sponsors. And use our link. Let them know that we send you. That really helps out the podcast as well. And you can try Shopify for just £1 a month for a trial period. That is a no-brainer. So give it a try right now. Head to this URL, shopify.co.uk/retrohour. That is all lowercase, shopify.co.uk/retrohour. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And get ready to take your business to the next level today and hear a lot of this. So thank you so much for checking out the news this week. A little reminder as well that if you want to help out the podcast, we appreciate not everyone can join us on Patreon, but there is something you can do. It'll only take a couple of seconds. It really helps out the show as well. It gets us in front of new people and feeds that algorithm that is so important. If you do listen on a platform that supports reviews, for example, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd appreciate a little 5-star review, nice little rating as well. Take a couple of seconds and really helps us get in front of new people. So any of those we get, we hugely appreciate those. And keep it here, going inside the psychology of classics like Myst and, of course, The Sims with our special guest, Nicole Lazzaro, next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Nicole Lazzaro, and she's from Zeo Designs, and this is an absolutely amazing little company. It's consulting for video games and helping them talk about emotions and working with such great games as The Sims, Myst, and Dynadash as well. So there's a great history there of computer games and emotion. Nicole was doing a lot of research when people weren't really looking at how emotions connected with video games. So I was wondering how you're doing, Nicole.
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. It's a thrill to be here.
Well, we have a question that we always ask our guests, and that was, what was your first gaming experience? You know, the first time you were kind of captured by a video game.
The very first game I ever played, and I stayed up almost all night playing, was Pong, the original Pong console on a TV. We had a big slumber party, and like families got together in those days, and we had this huge slumber party, like with multiple generations and families, you know, all like crashing on one person's house, and they had Pong, and so I was in this papasan chair the whole night playing Pong, and my heart was captured. It was like, wow, this is so cool. This is so cool.
Even today, Pong's one of those, just one more go, I can beat you this time kind of games, isn't it? So I bet that was
I realized that. And then like, oh yeah, if you don't move your head, your neck gets kind of sore. I realized that too. So yeah, and I was like, okay, I like this, but I'm going to have to be careful.
Yeah. Well, I also heard that you played a Colossal Cave Adventure on shared computers as well. I mean, So was that one of your first experiences of like, you know, immersion? Because obviously that built up like a big virtual world, didn't it, Colossal Cave Adventure?
It really did. So I was an arcade, like a video game arcade rat, you know, in high school. So I was playing, you know, some of my favorites were Star Wars, of course, and that Star Wars X-Wing, which was all vector graphics, and the Tempest, also vector graphics, and Burger Time and Q*bert and Joust and like all fun stuff. But yeah, when I went to Stanford, they had the LOTS, low overhead time sharing system, and it was a computer, you know, big rack of computers, whole room with like the reel-to-reel tapes in them, big fat reel-to-reel tapes. And yeah, Adventure was playing. We called it Adventure, and yeah, I would. Again, it was like, okay, you can stay up all night playing this. And it was really fun. It was really fun because you just had that little beep, 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 and you would, you know, little cursor on the screen, and you would type it in. And it was a version that had that had graphics in it as well. So it was all made out of these mazes with ASCII characters. So you could move your little character around. And I think it was the one with the dragon too, but it was quite some time ago.
Well, at Stanford, you studied psychology as well, and then later kind of got into film. But what drew you to psychology originally?
Well, it was the lack of required courses or the number of electives you could take. I wanted to do a special major in the psychology of filmmaking, which didn't go over well, so I couldn't do that. But and I wanted to do computer science, but there was no computer science degree at the time. If you can believe it, at that time, we were so early, it was considered a vocational, you know, too vocational for Stanford. They obviously have a different opinion now. But so I could major in math or philosophy, formal systems. And it was like, okay, neither of those sound very, very good. So I'll do psychology because I got lots of electives. And then I will basically major in psych, take the film production core, so I would learn how to make films, and then I would take a bunch of computer science related classes. So that's what I did.
Were there any like directors or films that stood out to you particularly and you know, really influenced you? Oh
well, yeah. I mean, film in the 80s, it was obviously the you know, kind of George Lucas and Star Wars and Steven Spielberg with Close Encounters. Jim Henson with the, obviously Jim Henson on TV with the Muppets, but also the Dark Crystal and some of those others. Just there was a lot of wild fantasy films in that era, and my heart was captured by being able to tell those stories. But the challenge was
other worlds as well.
Yeah, they really built worlds. And since I had, I had in a sense, and this inspired my, my later career too, is since, they really inspired, they created Wonderland and these different Wonderlands that you could go into. And I actually, having spent about 5 years as a kid in overseas in the Mideast, I grew up in Wonderland. I grew up in real life, riding camels, and climbing pyramids, exploring fire temples, and all that crazy stuff, Indiana Jones stuff. And I wanted to experience that in real life. And so in high school, I would go to a film and I would want to with my friends. And then I would want to not leave the theater, or I wanted to go into a space that was still that world of the film and just hang out with my friends and be in that world still. I didn't want the story to end. And it wasn't so much that story ended, but I wanted to continue the adventure somehow. And going to, you could go to the arcade and play like video games, that way, but they weren't necessarily games from that film, and so it was really challenging. And so that's kind of what inspired, I wanted to do that. I also wrote fiction at the time. You would call it fan fiction today. And, or, my original stories too. And then I wanted it again. It was too solitary. I wanted to bring my friends and have that shared adventure together.
Well, one thing we saw in the 80s was the home computer boom. Suddenly, computers became affordable and people could get them in their homes. So what was your first computer and why did you choose that machine?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So we in high school, we were, pretty humble beginnings. So we weren't able to afford a computer of our own. So I had friends, though, that had them. And I just loved watching them like program with like on a cassette tape. A friend of mine, Erin, she had one of those. But it was, so it wasn't until actually I graduated Stanford. Someone gave me a graduation present of $1,000, a little $1,000 check, which was like, wow. And they had a student special. So I bought myself an Apple Macintosh. Was it Pro at the time?
Right.
I keep thinking about but it was like, it didn't have a hard drive. It had a little floppy disk. And another relative gave me $300 and that covered the tax. So I didn't even have a printer or a hard drive. And so, but I had my little Mac Plus. That's what it was. It was a Mac Plus. And I bought a book by Danny Goodman called Hypertalk, I believe. And I taught myself how to program in Hypertalk on paper and pencil, right, actually, because I didn't have a hard drive. And, the HyperCard was a full disk, floppy disk. And so your code would have to live on one floppy disk and the operating system, the HyperCard would have to live on the other. You had to swap a lot. So I taught myself how to write HyperTalk or whatever, that language. And I built myself some little experiences, a little game. My first one was a computer game that taught math. Multiplication. I kind of hacked how HyperCard worked and created that. And at the time we had like the folks at Cyan were creating the caves of Dr. Pseudo and Spelunk, I guess. Their early games. And so I was playing those and got super inspired.
HyperCard is very flexible, though, wasn't it? Because even obviously we'll get onto Myst, but that was made in HyperCard as well on the Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, HyperCard was really cool because obviously I had learned already. I had learned some basic and some Fortran. I'm kind of, but definitely C. And but HyperTalk was, kind of a lot simpler. But you could use a lot of the constructs, from these other languages, such as arrays, and even though and then implement those in this more English style language. And it did. And then I did in order to get animation, I would operate the editing tool. So you would just take the box marquee tool. I would copy the object and then multiply it. So if it was like 3 times 4 or something like that, then I would take, a little shoe and I would copy it and then paste it 4 times or whatever, or 12 times. Just kind of hacking the operating system. But it was great because that HyperCard was I was really sad when, I think it's Dan Buttons, is the guy who wrote it. He did, when they discontinued it, because it was such a great prototyping tool, because you could just whip out really interactive storyboards super fast. You can kind of do that in PowerPoint today, but it's just really not the same. It's not ideal. It doesn't have as robust a scripting language as HyperCard did.
Well, when did you realize that, computers could create interactive film-like experiences, but then trigger emotions in a different way to films?
I think that emotionally it had to have been X-Wing, playing it in the arcade. Again, vector graphics, but because they had the voice actors from the film. This is Red 5 going in, and, the Force is strong with this one, for Vader's voice. That, put me in the world of film, even though I was only seeing lines on the screen. And so that's when I realized, and it was interactive. So that's where I could role play, in a sense, pieces of the film and relive those moments a bit, and then have some agency of what I did. So that's kind of the first one on just like a pure emotional going back into it. The other one was an interactive video disc, laser disc game called, I think it was called Dungeon Quest. Is that right?
Or maybe Dragon's Lair. Dragon's Lair.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that was an interesting one, and I was kind of wondering, like, even before that, did you follow any like early experimentation with like interactive movies or stuff in cinemas?
I don't think at the time I was in, we were in St. Louis, Missouri. So I didn't have a place that showed like interactive fiction where you could like, turn a dial and, choose a different ending or do voting. Although, obviously the Rocky Horror Picture Show was its own thing. And that was interactive in a sense because you had live audience on stage, in front of the film that was playing, but you didn't have much agency in terms of changing events. There was some experimental stuff, though. These are real early days with fan science fiction conventions. This is when science fiction conventions, I think, were just getting started. So there was one called Archon. So St. Louis, Missouri, we have the Arch, and so it was called ArchCon or Archon. And they had several of those kind of films where you could, where we would watch it, I guess, on videotape somehow, and then you could choose an ending, or you could choose like where the characters go. They had these interactive kind of theaters, and it was all homebrew stuff, which was kind of fun.
Well, going back to the work that you're doing on your Mac, then when you got that, doing these interactive games yourself in HyperCard. At what point did you decide that you wanted to basically make that a career then and get involved in the industry?
Well, I think that it happened actually right before I got my Mac and HyperCard. I worked at Stanford. My work study was with the SITN, the Stanford Instructional Television Network. And as part of that, they actually had some professors, we would, video record courses for, Silicon Valley. So I got to like audit tons of science and engineering classes and computer classes too, because I would videotape them. But we did one for the law. I can't remember the professor's name, but one for the Stanford law group for their courtroom procedures. So it was an interactive drama about objections. So it was a mock trial, and then it would play, and then you would hit the button when you think, as a lawyer, whatever. Oh, I should object here. So you could say objection to anything, and then depending on what it was, the judge would abstain or allow you to object. And I thought I was hooked. Then I was hooked because it was like, this is interactive film. And that was much better than just linear film, because again, you felt much more like you were actually going to be there, and much more like Dragon's Lair, that I've been playing in the arcades for hours and hours and hours.
So tell us about forming Zeo Design then. Where did the idea come from, and how did you go about getting the company up and running and getting your first contract?
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So I graduated Stanford, and then I had an opportunity to go to New York. Well, I graduated Stanford, and that summer I was an associate producer on Phil Zimbardo's, the psychologist, his Discovering Psychology series, non-interactive. And so I was definitely like, okay, I want to do more interactive stuff. So I went to New York for a year about 2 years, and volunteered for the IICS, which is the International Interactive Telecommunications Society. And the whole idea of interactive telecommunications was amazing. It was something super new. And so every month we would have some new video disc or whatever. And my very first project was, I did freelance work. And my very first project was, before there was CD-ROM, Pioneer had a standard called CDI, Compact Disc Interactive.
Yes.
And that was my first project. I did a magic, I helped produce. I was a producer, helped with the design a bit. I was prototyping HyperCard, and I helped with, how do you do magic? So it was a magic, how do you do magic, kind of instructional, thing. So that was kind of my very first project. And then I went on to work on things like interactive discs and museum exhibits. So like the lobby of of National Geographic had this enormous globe. And so I worked with a company that did that. And I helped with some of the AV, the audio visuals. And you could choose where in the world to go with some buttons on these big consoles. And then the physical globe would rotate. There would be a light would come on to where you're going, and then the panels all around you would highlight different clips of video. The same group did the Nixon Library, actually. Right. I don't think I was on that project, but there was with the Watergate tapes and everything. So we had transcripts of those, which was kind of interesting at the studio for a while.
It's interesting to hear that you developed for the Philips CDI, because I do remember seeing that system in like stores at the time, and being interested in it. Because I thought it's not quite a video player, it's not quite a computer, it's not quite a console. It's kind of somewhere in between. And I remember there's a lot of stuff like interactive encyclopedias, yes, that kind of multimedia craze in the early 90s. And I remember Commodore had the CD-TV as well. That was a similar machine, and they really thought that market was going to emerge, didn't they? That kind of living room multimedia box. I mean, what did you think of it as a concept?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was the early, CDI was really when it was starting to become the multimedia kind of concept was sort of building up. There was a interactive Smithsonian, interactive Sesame Street on CDI. And we were, trying to think out how could you interact? Like what would eventually, buttons, right? Because GUIs were just getting started, graphical user interfaces for computers. Well, what would that mean when you're pointing and clicking on media, and get, go those kinds of experiences. So yeah, it was, super early days for that. And there were tons of interactive books. And so you would see a book. It was just like, we go through this actually with every media. It's like you have this, you start with the media that It's like, okay, we know what a book does. And then you interact with it by turning the page. So there are tons of, Broderbund had a whole series. This was in CD-ROM days, of the Living Book series. So, Just Grandma and Me was a really popular one that I loved. But it had all you would do is you would click and you would turn the page, and then you would get another set of animations, and then you would tap on all the different, the starfish on the beach, and it would dance or something. Click on the words would pronounce. You had encyclopedias where you could underline, you could hypertext, Ted Nelson, that whole thing was kind of going on. But for me as a designer, what I really wanted to do was innovate. I wanted to create what is this? I wanted to explore as an artist. What is this new language? What could we do that's new and different? So I would often give myself on my project rules. Like when I moved back to California from New York, I had a stint at City Chemical Bank, and where I created, I rewired their, or re-architected their customer information, kind of a pre-ATM kind of thing. It's like, okay, I don't want to go into Wall Street. I want to go back to entertainment. So I came back here, and I said, yeah, I worked with a company, and it's like, I just could see that I was going to be kind of limited because I could see so much further. But we did a bunch of stuff for a bunch of CD-ROM kind of things for nutrition, smoking cessation. I did one for AIDS prevention, how to teach AIDS prevention for people with MR, with mental difficulties. And, and so we'd say okay, yeah, so there's no arrow. We don't have arrows. We don't have buttons. We don't have turn the page. What can we do? So we would create these little interactive worlds. After about a year at this company, I realized that, again, I was I wanted to do more. I wanted to start my own company and, make my own games and do a lot more stuff. So, that's when I founded Zio Design. I founded it as Onyx Productions. That's the first name for the company. But then eventually, Zio Design. And I really wanted to, I didn't phrase it this way, but I really wanted to use this stuff, use interactive media for good. Right. I really wanted to, what became our mission statement, I really wanted to unlock human potential through play. We did an Encyclopedia Britannica. I think that was our first contract gig as Zio. And then we went heavily into Mindscape and Broderbund and Learning Company and did a whole bunch of that interactive, CD-ROM educational content. those educational games, that was amazing. That was really, really, that was really, really fun. Everything from Carmen Sandiego to Rita Rabbit, to Mavis Beacon teaches typing.
Well, I was wondering as well, like, when did the kind of psychology start to get involved with it as well? Because I know you did a bit of research and study on players' emotions when people weren't really kind of doing that. And how do you think games kind of changed when you initially had that kind of single player experience, and then suddenly you had that co-op, people sitting there on the same couch and everybody playing the same game at the same time?
Yeah, well, what we did because of the background in psychology, I realized that getting customer feedback for designers from players was super important, and usability in the software world, non-games, just usability in the software world was starting to rise with, Nielsen Norman, Don Norman's book, and that kind of thing. So I decided to take some of those ideas and apply it to games. So through Broderbund, we started to work on the Myst series. We started with Riven, which we actually were the localization studio. So we did 3 localizations for Myst 2 Riven. And then we did user studies, so player studies, with a bunch of folks. Myst, the Myst series being one of them. And we realized when we had them in the studio, or we had, a game like Diner Dash or The Sims, is that there were a lot of different, what created engagement was really like these emotional states. I had, the same year I founded my company, I co-founded the multimedia studies program at San Francisco State. And when I taught an interactive design class for interactive media, I realized that some experiences, people would just play forever. They just interact, and you just wanted to do more and more and more. Or some experiences you would play for about 5 minutes, and then it's like, done. And this was true for games and also non-games. So there was something happening psychology-wise that made you want to continue. And I realized that it was more than just a Skinner box. It was more than the psychology of the casino. There was other stuff going on. So that was kind of my first inspiration for applying psychology. So I developed a lot of practices we take for granted today, because not only did people at the time not really consider emotions that important, both frankly in psychology at the time too, as well as obviously in games for sure. But they also didn't, they didn't value players or player feedback very much. But of course, that's much different today. Mm. And then in 2003, I think fast forward a bit, I asked a panel at GDC about how, and these were some of my favorite people in games, my favorite designers, well, what would it be like wouldn't it make sense to, would you be interested, would it make sense to ask players what they found fun? Would it make sense to look at players and, see how they feel, how they respond to the games? And these titans of the industry who are amazing designers, and they just do it intuitively. They don't have to use a formula or, any other sort of framework. But they said, no. And then once one of them said oh, well, no, the only 3 emotions, the games do 3 emotions, if anything else: the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat, and the feeling of, maybe they can make you cry. That was a big EA campaign in early games, that games can make you cry. And so I realized, I just thanked them, and, it was very polite. And then I just, was kind of fuming inside. It's okay, I'm going to come back next year and prove you're wrong. Because I had seen, you put your hand on a Myst book in Myst, right? And I had heard players, talk about the tickle, the electrical feeling up their arm, come up their arm from their hand and up the back of their neck. And that's a classic signal for wonder. So that's a very complex emotion. That's not just, the 3 emotions. So I thought, okay, I'll get my, so first I went around and tried to get one of my clients or some of my clients to fund the research that I would need, because I know it would have to be a fairly large study. The initial round was about 60 players, which is quite a large one. But none of them would step up to it. Why would we play? We just want, if we're going to test, we're going to pay for testing. We're going to test our games, not anybody's games. So I decided to self-finance the research. I don't know, take a sabbatical is not the right word, but I decided to devote a lot of time for about a year to actually run this study, because I'd been already like researching emotion and product design and that sort of thing, and realized there was a huge gap. It was very important to how people respond to technology, but yet not very well studied.
Yeah, I guess it was just kind of getting your point across in those early days, wasn't it? And making people take it seriously.
Yeah, I was very nervous in 2004 when I presented the 4 Keys to Fun at the Game Developer Conference. I had printed out little cards that showed the time in the room, and that was my talk. And I had handed them out to, Ralph Koster, Will Wright, Jesse Schell, like all the big folks, and all my, these are a lot of people that I really respect in the industry. Yeah, and then they actually, a lot of them showed up. But yeah, it was not, I was really nervous that people would be, that people just wouldn't understand. However, I also felt it was a very important message to bring, because I didn't want the game industry to fall down into where Vegas went, where Las Vegas went, which is, the sort of clicky, highly clicky Skinner boxes. Because on one hand, game designers love psychology in a sense. And then the really well documented psychology of engagement is, the stuff that had been funded by the casino industry. And so behaviorism and, Skinner and Pavlov and stuff like that, they've all, those different branches of psychology was well researched and applies to any kind of interactive media, but there was so much more. And so I thought, well, what could one person do, one small studio do that could be the fulcrum to like turn the mothership? And so I thought, if I did this study and then released the results for free with a very actionable, framework for people to do that based on, it created emotions based on what players love the most about games, and then was measurable in the lab by researchers. And then fourthly would be that game designers could, have levers, to move. And so that's how the 4 Keys to Fun was released. It was released to the world. That was the idea, so that we could have some tools and language for what could come. So again, it kind of goes back to when I was talking about Wonderland with how I grew up, is that at the turn of this century, so in 1999, a couple years before that GDC, I was, sort of standing on top of a temple in the middle of the Egyptian desert. It was a hot, dry day, and sun was beating down, parching my lips, and I reached down for my canteen, but I stopped, because there on the top of the temple, like looking at my feet, someone had carved a game board. And I thought, wow, 2,000 years ago, 2 people had stood where I stood and thought to pass their time with a game. And I wondered, what would those people think of the games we've played now? And then what would, maybe looking forward to the year 2020, which was 20 years in the future at the time, what kind of games would I want to play then? What were the emotions I wanted to feel? How did that, interactive cinema, how did playing with friends feel? Adventure that you could take your friends on. How would that feel? And I realized as I walked back to my boat on the Nile that everything that we knew about games was going to change, would have to change to get those experiences I wanted to feel. We didn't even have the tools or the language to describe these kinds of experiences, these kinds of emotions. And so that moment is really, where I, sort of committed to, make that my life's work of really understanding the role of emotions coming from gameplay.
Well, a couple of minutes ago, you did touch on Myst, which obviously, in the early 90s, the amount of people that bought new computers and new CD-ROM drives specifically to play that game. Exactly. It was like the first massive CD-ROM title, really, and it offered, a whole new type of world. So tell us about your work on Myst, and what do you think works so well on that game? Why was it such a revolution?
So Myst came out I founded my company in 1992, and I think Myst came out in 92, 93 sort of time frame. And we had, and it was one of the games because I knew that there were emotions. I knew you could watch someone play Myst and you could see in this moment, they're going to click on that. And when they click on that, they're going to feel this. Chances are, you can't predict exactly, but chances are they're going to feel surprised. They're going to feel wonder. They're going to feel scared. You could really see that very predictably. And at the time we were working again with Broderbund. So I had worked on, we were doing demos. So we made demo versions of Carmen Sandiego, demo versions of, these different titles, and Myst, was amazing. We did some marketing, I made a background for, the Myst trailer in their Photoshop and stuff like that. So that went out on Myst 1. And then it was definitely that moment when I had played it, after release. When I first played Myst, it was, I'd spent all weekend on it, probably weekend plus on it. And then I was driving into work, and I was up on the freeway and I just realized, wait, it was Monday morning. It's I want to go back. I was wait, where do you want to go back to? You weren't on vacation, but I felt like I'd been someplace else. Right. And so that was the real, much more deep than playing adventure, a text adventure, on Stanford lots. This was a much deeper adventure. So we had the privilege to work on Riven. And so my role there was, we were a localization studio. So we localized, all of those books, all the journals. The Gens Lab journal changed right before the end. It was no, but we did that, and to translate all those languages. And then I guess we had about 13 days between Gold US Master and then International Gold Master, because we wanted to ship they wanted to ship a simultaneous release. We were the only localization studio to do that. So we did it for, three markets. And having the ability to, be as part of that team and part of that effort, and having access to all of that content and see how it all went together, was super inspirational for us to create our own virtual worlds. And then later we worked on a couple of other Myst titles, like Uru and Myst 5, where we did player testing. And then so that deep dive into the gameplay. So it was basically what moment to moment, what were these experiences, again and again and again with dozens of players, and then working with the team at Cyan to, facilitate their interpretation of the data, was really amazing to see inside, their creative process. And then also how did Myst really work? How was it, it wasn't just that it was 3D, it wasn't just, the story. What was it that would, that created engagement in this time frame? You couldn't have interactive NPCs running around in 3D animation, right? You still were in either, small windows of video, or small windows of video that were disguised to look like full screen video. Or I guess the Presso Studios, they were doing the video tube kind of things, but they really weren't the interactive stuff that we see today. And so environmental storytelling, I think, was probably my biggest takeaway from working on the Myst series, with Cyan. And that was that if you think about, it's especially apparent in the first Myst, where they would tell, it was kind of like in traditional storytelling, you have character arcs, the character at the beginning is different than they are at the end. And in interactive fiction, though, you want to be able to have people choose and make choices. And so the characters were more like onions, sort of like character revelation. So the characters would reveal themselves, bring me another blue page, and you would reveal more about the character as you go. And then with the places that you went to, there was this other layer of storytelling where it was environmental storytelling, where the environment you were in a personal space of one of the characters. And you would learn oh, this one is really cruel, or this one is really greedy. And so you would learn about their interests and their flaws. And with, and it was interactive because you were just uncovering more and more gradually revealing more details about each of the characters and what had gone in the past. And so I've taken a lot of those lessons into what we're working on now with Follow the White Rabbit Tales, which is a mystery adventure, so that you find out about pieces of this mystery, in little bits. And so that you create in your mind, in the player's mind, you sew it together. So it's not a linear narrative. Yeah.
It was really weird, Myst, because, it was quite primitive, the first one, but it had such an atmosphere, and you're completely right. It kind of captures the space in your mind and you want to be in that world again. It was really, really interesting as well with the soundtrack and the whole kind of atmosphere. And what was it kind of like working on Myst 2 with the added FMV elements and the kind of non-linear feel of it, where you had, you were put in a direction, but you felt like you had a bit more kind of freedom.
Yeah. So they had this, it was amazing because with Riven, again, I played it in a weekend, and I had to play it with some of the palettes being broken. So there was a color puzzle at the end. And the palette, you do super palettes at the time, right? So there's 256 colors. If you choose your ranges, like 3 ranges of colors, you can get like a lot more colors. So you get the feeling of full color, but you're still only really 256 colors. Anyway, and then if you get the super palette, if it broke, which it did, then, and this is a pre-release, this is not before. I was like, oh, wow, how am I going to, okay, that is purple and that's supposed to be yellow, even though, whatever.
And those puzzles were tricky enough even when it worked properly anyway.
I know. I know. It's like, oh gosh, I felt so chuffed when I was like, yeah, I felt really great when I was able to actually solve it, even though the colors were off. But I'm sorry, that's, that the title is amazing. And it is I think there was something I really liked about those Mysts were that the ones that Cyan did was that because of it's sort of a slideshow in a sense. You click and you get a new view. You click and you get a new view. And that rhythm, that repetition in rhythm, which is a mechanic in the 4 keys called serious fun. It's the 4th key. It puts you into this hypnotic kind of space. You're clicking and moving forward. And you had full motion video at parts, right? And that meant you would get on the gondola and you would whip around the island, and it made it much more feel like a real place. But that stepwise thing I felt was really amazing. I interviewed them. In Game Developer Magazine, there's an interview, an article I did with them about developing of Riven. I flew up to Cyan and got to interview them, and they talked a lot about how they use that click and move forward, or click to look left, or click to look right, is they didn't want people to just run through the environments. And so these extra clicks slowed you down, and in a sense, in their design philosophy was, that it slowed you down so that you could really examine and look and not just chew through scenery. And so that created more of the experience that they want, because there's a big sign up big post sign up there, which is, the journey is the reward. And I really love that as one of their core design philosophies up at Cyan. It's just amazing.
We're talking about other huge franchises that you've worked on. The Sims, obviously, still massive to this day, and also got a huge focus in balancing emotions in The Sims. So how did you get involved with that series?
Yeah, that's amazing. So we had already worked with the Sims group, what became the Sims group. The Sims. Before there was the Sims, there was Sim Ant, Sim Earth, lots of different Sim titles, SimCity. The success of SimCity then brought a bunch of, they did a bunch of spin-offs. Not all of them made it to market. And so we did a bunch of what we call play shops. So I worked with the teams to create, doing, design exercises. You kind of call them design thinking, I think, today, but this was way before that trend. So we got a chance to work with the Sims on The Sims 2. So Will Wright had actually I invited him to the 4 Keys talk in 2004. And he was really, really excited. I gave him a worksheet that I had built for the event, and he distributed that to the team. And then we came in and did some more consulting with them on the Sims 2. So in Sims 2, what they wanted more of a cinematic feel, and the the feeling of like kind of a little bit more like a, TV sitcom sort of thing that you were watching. So they changed the camera, kind of the camera angle. They were experimenting with that. So how would that go? And so I was talking a bit about film language with them. But mostly what you would see is that was every year, every edition, The Sims changes a little bit. And for that year, they had the hopes and fear meters. And so you could, min-max the relative health of the different characters, not just the health, but their emotional states. And so that came, that was really amazing, because that was very similar to what we were teaching, what we worked with them at the time, which was these emotion action pairs coming out of our research on the 4 keys to fun. So what actions would the players do, and how would the player feel afterwards, or before, during, and after? That's a very core design pattern for all of the Sims. And that's something that we were having a lot of fun with the team working out for on our in our workshops with them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people would just play it in total different ways. Some people would like nurture and care for the Sims, and some people would be completely cruel and, try to kind of be horrible to them, or make them completely have a breakdown. So it added a total different kind of dynamic that game did.
Yeah, and then what Will Wright would always tell the team is that if you do this, how would the player feel? So if they do any action that the player would take, how is the player going to feel afterwards? So making sure that there was a big emotional response is important. There's a great video on the vaults. I was there at I think I saw it live, but at GDC on artificial intelligence in The Sims, and that was big A, small I. He said, the presenter said, I forget it's the producer's name, and it was there's just a lot of it's not AI like we think of today with generative AI, which is the big hotness, but there's a bunch of he just showed these huge charts of, well, if the player did this and that unlocked these other things, and unlocked this, and so on. So there's these huge logic trees that drove a lot of the narrative. So if your character gets curious about the stars, you give them this telescope. You give them the telescope, they get curious about the stars. If they pursue that for a while, they eventually get the alien abduction. And so it feels kind of like narrative. It feels kind of like a story because of that progression, and the progression comes out of the player actions.
And you could also kind of create that fantasy world as well. I saw at one point there was this software where you could put your own face on The Sims and stuff. And
oh my gosh, yeah.
That would probably be really dodgy these days. But I can imagine people, maybe ultimately doing the job that they always wanted to do, or kind of living in the house that they wanted to do. So, playing out some fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Will Wright's got a number of great talks. I've seen him on stage about how The Sims, people would role play, create stories. So some of the story, they would stories, and then early machinima kind of things where they would, create narratives and then work things out. So they have, a challenging, they're in a challenging relationship. So they may role play that using The Sims as a way to process, how they're feeling in real life.
Well, you mentioned Will Wright there. What was it like working alongside him?
Yeah, he is amazing. One of the titans of the game industry for sure. He is just so brilliant. The thing I admired the most about Will, especially in those days, is that here he was, like one of the most famous people in games, and he would be at GDC with a notebook, going to tons of talks and taking notes. He was always, and is, always super, he's always researching. He's always like getting new ideas. And I'm very fascinated to see he's got an AI, as far as I know, he's got this new AI game that they're working on still called Proxy, which looks really fascinating, where they're using AI to, he would describe it better, but where they're using AI to create, again, it's kind of this, you can create your own narratives or relationships with, with this with this AI. Yeah, it's going to be really amazing when they are able to tell more about it.
I was looking just now, and it turns out there's been 112 Sims games released, which is that's got to be like a record for the most amount of games in a franchise, I'm sure.
Well, what people don't realize is that, like a lot of people will say like, oh, Myst, yeah, that was a pretty, but it's, but not very significant in the history of like all games, right?
Yeah.
What people don't realize is that Myst on CD-ROM, one of the very first successful CD-ROMs, was so successful that it was the best-selling game of all time.
Yeah.
Myst was. And it was the best-selling game of all time until another game took it out of first place. And that game was The Sims. A lot of people that like other kinds of games don't like to to realize that. But yeah, it's because both of those games, they really address a mass market, right? They really, you don't have to like war and combat. There is a lot of men, a lot of women all playing, and so it's a much bigger pool for people to play games.
Do you think that's why it's lasted so long? So, I mean, I know people that play The Sims and don't really play other video games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's that they have expansion packs, so they've done really good job of keeping the content, fresh. When The Sims launched, again, Will Wright talking to you can see it up on the Vault GC. We talked about this pyramid where when The Sims launched, 70% of the content for The Sims, I think, was generated by players. So it was the first kind of UGC play in a game. And so at the base was the, people who played the game of this pyramid. And then above that was a tier of people making content for The Sims. And then above that were the shops they couldn't sell them, but they were the distributors for the content for The Sims. And so they had, they really led the UGC wave. Expansion packs were done. We worked on a couple of we had Cosmopolitan Virtual Makeover is another one. So other games, had done it, but they really mastered it. Plus, don't call it a dollhouse, but it's based on a very, 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 very popular, very commonplace style.
Yeah, I never thought of that before, but now you mention it, yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought of them a bit like Tamagotchis, kind of virtual pets that you have to keep. Oh, yeah. But now they've got ambitions and stuff, and they're a lot more advanced. Right.
Well, there is that Tamagotchi thing too. There is that, but because it's people and interactions, there are again like Barbie, kind of like Barbie has expansion packs, right? The physical doll Barbie and G.I. Joe, they've got, or Legos, they have different fantasies that you can take. So I think that's really that's really helped, and it's been led by the franchise has been led and directed by a number of very, very smart people to kind of keep it going. Well, and again, it comes down to like you do something and you feel. So there have been other sim-like people simulator kind of games, but they really haven't mastered that core loop, that attention to detail in terms of how players are responding to different moments in the game.
Well, I know you've done a lot in the VR and AR space as well, and I was wondering kind of with these kind of emerging areas of play, what types of play do you think we might see in the future?
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a really good question. So on one hand, we have VR and AR. So we have these fully occluded virtual worlds that are 3D. You have the AR, more mixed reality experience. We have 3D virtual stuff that's projected onto your real world. So you have that technology, and which is great. You can talk about that. But really what it comes down to is you really want to have that emotional experience. You wanted to have that feeling of, adventure. And so that's what's really driving our game with Follow the White Rabbit. It's a mystery adventure, you play in your real room with your real friends. So we start in VR, and then we're, in future episodes it's episodic. So in future episodes, we'll be opening it up. So it's in your room. And you can go to these places. So if you think again, like where I grew up in Wonderland, and I grew up in all these different, traveling a lot of places. And so each of the episodes is an escape room that happens in one of the cities that I grew up in. And so we go from Paris, we go from Paris to Iran to, Japan, China, the pyramids of Egypt, that kind of thing. But the future where we're going now, I think with AR especially, and I'll be talking about this at the GameSpeed Summit next week, is the ability to project these games, into your real world in a way that creates an adventure you're sharing with your friends. Sort of, it's going, if you can think about a continuum, the first generation of these mixed reality games is kind of like a Princess Leia hologram, from Star Wars. It's, floating. It's the Pokemon Go, a little floating, virtual character. But the next stage is really more like Star Wars chess. So it's a board game, a 3D virtual board game, and you have a shared board, and you can play games with your friends. And that's kind of like Tilt 5, for example, which is really great if you haven't tried it. AR glasses that you can play, and there's a lot of interaction.
Is that Jerry Ellsworth's?
Yes, that's Jerry Ellsworth.
Yeah. We've heard a lot about that. We're big fans of Jerry's work. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she is amazing. Tilt 5 is amazing. Yeah, it's great because if there's the 4 keys, you can actually see the other people that you're playing against or playing with the glasses, because you just feel like you're more present in the room. You don't have, you feel like you're actually there with them, and as opposed to like looking at a screen and you have your friend like in the side, you just see them in the sideways. You look right across the table. It's amazing. So that's that second phase, and then the third phase is what we're working on, where the AR elements are in the world around you, and you're interacting with them and playing this game, the shared game, together. And I think that it's both. So it's both the world and scene understanding. It's that, plus it is this natural, the most fun thing about any game really is the people. It's really all about the people. There are more emotions in social interaction than any of the other kind of interactions in games. And so having it be multiplayer is super important and super fun. I mean, not just you have to. Solitaire is still a great game. And, sometimes you just want to be in your own little world and not interacting with your, rambunctious friends. But, having the rambunctious friends, like a mystery dinner party, is just awesome. And I think that's where, games can really take us. And I think it's an opportunity to think outside the box in terms of gameplay as well, because the industry has, like when I released, one of the motivations for the 4 keys in 2004 was that the games had gotten pretty stale, in my opinion, that they had there were only 4 or 5 different kinds of games. It was like going to the toy store, and there's only Hot Wheels, for racing games, and cowboys and Indian games, and maybe Dungeons and Dragons, maybe the Dollhouse for the Sims, but there was only these kinds of games. And so I wanted the 4 keys to break out into different types of games. And so I'm hoping with, VR, XR, whatever R you want to talk about it, is that we'll have the ability to make new kinds of genres, new kinds of games. Everything simple, from simple things like Black Box, which is out on the Apple Vision Pro, to something that are, things that are more complicated and interested and interesting, and not just a bunch of, the shooting games are fine, but let's, Doom, Doom was a great game. Castle Wolfenstein is an awesome game.
Still is, yeah.
Yeah, it still is, right? But there are other things to do. We play in so many other kinds of ways. So, and I think that it's healthier to have a diet of different types of games as well.
Well, I was about to say we've come a long way from Myst, but then I remembered I was actually playing Myst on the Oculus Quest 2, the VR version of it. And it worked quite well in virtual reality, actually.
It did. I had a moment. Yeah, when I played it, I the Imager Room by the docks is one of my favorite locations in the game. And the sound and, everything is just great. And I just had a moment. It's like, wow, I had to sit down. I sat down on the floor in my living room and just like started to tear up. It was like, oh my gosh, we're actually here, right? I felt actually there, right? And yeah, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. And then Riven now is getting remastered. There's like video. Yeah, I'm seeing little trailers. It's like, oh my gosh, Riven's coming. Yeah, a higher version of Riven, higher resolution version of Riven, which would be awesome.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Nicole, it's been incredible to talk to you and hear some of your memories and also your thoughts as well on where the industry is going. It's been a fascinating chat. So thank you so much for coming on and being our guest this week.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you and trip down memory lane. My goodness, those early days. I haven't gone there in a long time. So thank you so much for the opportunity.